Hello, everybody, and welcome to this final webinar of the school year for the Teacher Institute for Evolutionary Science. Today we have two wonderful people joining us. I'm very much looking forward to this. We're going to speak today with Ariel Marcy and Bailey Harris. Let me introduce them. Ariel is a PhD candidate in evolutionary biology at the University of Queensland and an educational game designer. She's below me on the screen. And that way, we have Bailey Harris, a 14-year-old Bailey. She's an author, a speaker, and an advocate for free thought and human rights. She's the author of the Stardust series of science books for young readers. And today they're going to be talking about their new game, pictured in the bottom right, Stardust Edition of Go Extinct, the Evolutionary Tree Board Game. It's a fun way to learn the concept of Darwin's evolutionary tree with the Stardust version of this award-winning science game. They do have a Kickstarter program, and I'm going to go ahead and put that back into the chat. Okay. While we begin here, if you want to check out the Kickstarter program, if you have questions, there is an Ask a Question section at the bottom where I'll be asking both Bailey and Ariel questions that you pose along the way. Maybe we'll do those at the end. And now I'm going to pass the mic on to my two guests.
Yay! Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you today. Thank you for the Teacher Institute for Evolutionary Education for inviting us to talk to you about our upcoming game, Stardust Catches the Carnivores. Yeah. This is... Next line.
Oh, I'm going to go ahead and make it large then, so everybody can see that larger, okay?
Yeah, next line. Yeah, this is my family. I have two older brothers, a younger sister, and two dogs. Next line. My family loves science, so I grew up watching educational shows like Bill Nye the Science Guy and PBS Kids. And when I was little, my parents would read us educational books like Magic of Reality. Next line. This is me on my first day of third grade. As you can see, I was really excited to start third grade. Third grade is when I wrote my first book. I'll tell you how this happened. Next line. As you know, my family loves science, and together every Sunday night we watched Cosmos. Next line. In one episode, Neil deGrasse Tyson said, "The planets, the stars, the galaxies, we ourselves, all life, the same star stuff." When I was young, I thought that this fact was mind-blowing. I couldn't believe that our bodies in the world is made out of stardust. I wanted people to know about this amazing fact. Next line. So I ran upstairs to the computer and started typing a book. This is an actual document from the day, from that day. My original title was The Book of Truth. Next line. This is a picture of me when I was 8 years old, showing how I wanted the cover to look on my book. I was so excited to show off how I wanted it to look and the fact that people could read the book and learn about Stardust. Next line. We changed the title of the book, and this is how the book looks like now. Next line. In this book, we talk about how life on Earth is related. We all evolved from single-celled organisms. Next line. And I talk about how we are all made of stardust from stars that have exploded over billions of years ago. Next line. And I talk about my favorite ancient creature, Tiktaalik. Next line. And and Purgatorius that evolved into all mammals, including us. Next slide. And of course, Lucy, the first ape-like animal that walked upright, much like humans do now. Next slide. This is my second book. It's called Stardust Explores the Solar System. We start off by talking about the Big Bang and how our galaxy, the Milky Way, and how it formed around 13 billion years ago. Next slide. Okay, that was my second book. And you saw in my first book, we show quite a few examples of evolution in this book, like Teak Teak, Lucy, and Purgatorius. Since then, my parents have asked to write more about evolution. It's a hard topic to teach, but we have decided to help out and decide our third book to be about evolution. Next slide. This is my third book, Stardust Explores Earth's Wonders. Teaching the fundamentals of evolution to children is not easy, so we reached out to Ariel Marcy, the game designer of our family's favorite games, Go Extinct. And Ariel volunteered to help us with this book. We are so very grateful to her because we wouldn't have the same without her involvement. Next slide. We use geology to introduce the concept in this book. Next slide. And we talk about the history of Earth. Next slide. How evolution is like a tree with branches. Next slide. This is the difference between direct ancestors and cousins. Next slide. And how we are related. Oh, and this page is, yeah. We give simple examples on the white fur on polar bears. Next slide. And how we're related to other mammals. Next slide. And this is the page that inspired the new game that we are discussing today. Ariel will talk more about this. Next slide. We are so grateful to have the opportunity to work with Ariel on the new version of Go Extinct. This game will be coming out later this year. This is my family playing the latest version of the game. Yep. Now on to Ariel.
Awesome. Okay, I'm up. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Bailey. So just a little bit about myself. I'm a UQ University of Queensland PhD thesis candidate, and that's me in the Museum of Queensland holding up a very tiny rat skull. And I used technology to scan those skulls and make research about how rodents evolved in Australia. And I thought that project was so cool because they're very recent arrivals to Australia. So I'm an evolutionary biologist, but I also really love teaching. And so this is a picture of me teaching at Stanford. Right after I graduated, I had the opportunity to teach full-time in their really neat course called Human Biology. So it's a year-long course that combines biology subjects for undergrads as well as social science. And so it's especially great for students interested in a whole range of topics, everything from medicine to policy. And teaching this course certainly taught me a lot about how to cater subjects, especially difficult ones, for a wide range of students. And it certainly affected my game design philosophy. One of my favorite classes as an undergrad was design. And I was impacted by a wonderful design teacher. And I also loved bringing in my biological knowledge into some of my designs. So coming out of college, I was wondering, okay, how can I combine all these three interests of biology, teaching, and graphic design? And the answer was pretty clear. It was game design. So the first steps into making Go Extinct, however, had to start with a bit of failure. Now, failure is a little bit of a loaded term in education, but I think we as teachers know that making mistakes is actually a really important part of learning as long as we learn from them. And so the mistakes that I was making as a new teacher had to do with a subject that was near and dear to my heart, which was teaching the idea of how to read evolutionary trees. Now, this concept is something that I lived and breathed as an evolutionary biologist. For me, I sort of think of evolutionary trees as a Rosetta Stone, because with an evolutionary tree, I can approach a new group of organisms, and if there are a few organisms that I'm familiar with, I can start to make inferences about what might be true about those other organisms that I don't know so well. So when I was starting to teach this, I made the mistake of someone who's a little bit more of an expert, who's forgotten what it's like to be a beginner. And I found that it was really hard to teach this idea to some of my undergrads. And in fact, most of them struggled to learn it in some of the linear formats that we often use with teaching, such as standing at the board or using books. So that was the impetus. How could I teach something that's a little bit more dynamic, something that's harder to teach in a linear format? So one of the things that we know as scientists is that science is more than just cool facts. Science is figuring out how to string those cool facts into a story with a narrative thread that makes sense. And so stories are an amazing part of science. It's how we communicate what we already know. And it's also the process of how to thread those facts together into a way that we can figure out more. So here's an example of ways that Darwin threaded together his idea for evolution. And all of these pictures represent experiences or knowledge that he had that helped him put together the 4 tenets of evolution. The first of which being, of course, is that there's variation within populations. And he was an avid beetle collector. So avid, sometimes he would grab 3 beetles, and if he saw a 4th that he wanted, he would put those 3 in his mouth and grab the 4th one. We also know that in those times, pigeon breeding was all the rage. So he also had some direct knowledge of the heritability of some of these variations. He was an avid reader, so he knew some of the ideas from Thomas Malthus and the problem with overpopulation and the scarcity of resources. And finally, from his amazing travels on the Beagle, he got direct experience looking at how some of these variations were more adaptive in different environments. So together, he was able to test some of these ideas, explore, get feedback, and really think about what would be the outcomes of some of these ideas. And this is a diagram from Understanding Science from Berkeley, and it's a really great resource if you haven't checked it out already. But what it emphasizes is that the scientific method is not like a recipe. It's not step by step. It's something that's dynamic and that it can take multiple steps. And as we know, Darwin took a very long time to write The Origin of Species, and he did a great job. So one way we can pitch science is actively asking, how do all these true stories fit together? So my question was, well, are games one way to do this? And in order to win a game, of course, you need some objectives. So the objectives that I set out for myself were to ask, can games teach some of these nonlinear concepts better than other more traditional methods? And these nonlinear concepts would include, of course, ideas about evolution. And then the second objective is, can games convey that dynamic nature of the scientific method, especially in the experience of the game itself, which is often more cyclical than more traditional methods of teaching. If you do have to explain the scientific method in a linear way, I find the best way to do this is to emphasize the system-based nature of the scientific method. So starting from those observations, like the ones that Darwin was making, figuring out how they fit into a system, like evolution by natural selection, and then starting to make interpretations. And whenever you have systems, you start to think about emergence. What emerges from that system being in motion? Of course, one example of this is going from microevolution to those macroevolutionary patterns. So what's cool is that games are also emergent systems that just happen to be fun. So here I'm going to introduce to you one of games' most important design frameworks. It's called the MDA framework, and that stands for Mechanics, Dynamics, and Aesthetics. So at each level, there's going to be some emergence. So first, we have the mechanics. And these are just the static pieces of the games, which includes the pieces like the cards and the boards, and then the rules that tell the players how to set them in motion. Now, once the players do that, that's when we get the dynamics. So that's when we get some exciting things happen. That's when players are starting to make choices about what to play, what to ask, how to think about what other players are doing. And out of these choices, they're starting to figure out a strategy. And what emerges out of that over time, over the whole course of the game, is what game designers call aesthetics. And in game design, aesthetics doesn't necessarily mean what the game looks like. It means how it feels over that four-dimensional experience over time. It's the interpretive narrative that the player has about the progress of the game, how they felt when they were behind, when they came back ahead, when they stole that card from their little sister. All of these things play into the aesthetics and the interpretive narrative of the game. So you can see that I've created a graphic that shows the similarities, at least I think, of what scientific method is like to game design's MDA frameworks. And as a game designer, I try to use these parallels to help me design science games that not only convey systems-based science ideas, but also give players a little bit of what it feels like to be a scientist figuring this out on the fly. So what I'd like to do is use the classic Go Extinct as an example of how this works, and then I'll go into some of the improvements that we've made with the Stardust Edition. So starting off with mechanics. And with the mechanics, I've especially focused on communicating that the evolutionary tree you can think of as being like sets within sets. Now, the sets within sets idea was not a new one to Darwin's time. Linnaeus, of course, had been around for at least 100 years. But what Darwin's secret was that these sets within sets exist, not because of some grand master plan, but because these organisms share ancestors at different lengths of time. And you can see in that very famous, very first evolutionary tree that the letters indicate organisms that are more or less closely related given their relationship to one another, and yet they all share that common ancestor at the number 1. So what I've done with the board of Go Extinct is use color to communicate this idea of sets. And now Go Extinct is called Go Extinct because it's a little bit like Go Fish, which is a set collecting game. But instead of collecting sets of the same number or all of the kings, for example, you are collecting sets of closely related animals. So you're collecting the crown clades. And what you need to do is you need to first use the board to figure out how big those crown clades are. And so as you'll see on this board, some of those crown clades have 4 animals that connect to those solid colored circles. And this is reflected in the cards as well. So you'll see that there are 4 terrible lizards or dinosaurs that you need to collect before you can declare that complete clade. So we're starting to get ideas of monophyly as well. But you'll notice that all the other clades are a little bit smaller, and that each of these colors help us figure out how many you need and how many cards, how many unique animals you need to get in order to get a complete set or a clade, which is what we call it in evolution and also in the game. So again, those color-coded sets give you the clades that you need to collect, and the colors are very carefully chosen to indicate that degree of relatedness. And that degree of relatedness relates to how recently they had an ancestor. So you'll notice that all of the toothy grinners, or the archosaurs, are green, whereas the next ancestor, most distant, is the holyheads, the diapsids. We think of them as the lizards, is sort of like the greens, but it's yellow. So this kind of color coding helps us infer the kinds of sets within sets, thinking that's really fundamental to reading these evolutionary trees. And I'll just put this figure in here, which is coming straight out of my thesis, which I just submitted last week, is that scientists use this kind of color communication all the time. So the next step is the dynamics. And now we're setting the game into motion. We don't have the clades already completed. So now we're starting with a hand of random cards, and we need to start collecting cards from our opponents in order to complete those clades. So again, our goal is to collect those color-coded clades, and say we have this starting hand at the bottom. What should we ask for? And I'm actually going to put Bailey on the spot here and ask her, what would be her asking strategy?
My technique is I like to keep track of what other people ask for. Then I ask them the certain animal, because if you ask for the certain animal that the person asked for, that person will get another turn. That's what I use.
Nice. Okay, so Bailey is using the specific ask to get, say, the chicken. And the reason she can do this is that she's really good at listening and inferring what other players have in their hand based on what they're asking for. And in the game, this means that if she does that risky ask of asking for the chicken, giving away that she's going for terrible lizards and probably has those other 3 dinosaurs, is that if she takes that risk and she gets the chicken, she gets to ask again. So this is the kind of strategy where I call it the specific but obvious. You're giving a little bit away about your hand. So the other spectrum of that is the general yet mysterious. So you can ask for these deeper common ancestors, which increases the likelihood of getting any card that might help you collect any of those clades in your hand, but you have less control over the kinds of animals you might receive, but you give much less information away about your hand. So why I think Go Extinct is a good learning game is that the winning strategy is generally encouraging players to think about these different ancestors and the different degrees of relatedness, and using the evolutionary tree to figure out their probability of getting a win. But of course, this depends on how well you can listen. So next up is the aesthetics, how it feels over the course of the game. And this is where I think the game helps you feel a bit like a scientist, because you're figuring out how to make your strategy, and you're figuring out what works based on trial and error of your own asking strategy, but you're also learning from what your peers are doing too. And of course, working with your peers is a huge part of science as well. And you can see that that scientist in the pink shirt just made a really good ask and is having a really good experience collecting that clade. So you're getting a really positive reinforcement of trying out this kind of science and approaching a really difficult concept. The other thing that I find when I playtest these games with students is that they figure out how to make the content really relevant to them. And one of everybody's favorite facts is that chickens are dinosaurs. And in this student's case, it's amazing that we've been eating them. And so this is cool because it helps make natural history really relevant. And one of the best pieces of feedback that I've gotten from teachers is that games are a medium that reach kids that don't necessarily thrive under the traditional teaching methods. So in this case, some of the least motivated kids were actually teaching the quote nerds how to play a game because they were really comfortable with games. And this translated into caring about the biology and had quantitative benefits as well. And I think this is the power of a well-designed educational game. So, games for the win. I think that I've met the 2 objectives that I set for myself. And the game has been recognized, including by the Teacher Institute for Evolutionary Science with positive reviews. One of the reviews that I really appreciated getting is that unprompted, Dr. Shorning stated that I had reached my goal, is that I had taught a concept that I couldn't teach when I was first starting at Stanford, not only to undergraduates, but to students much younger. The game has also been recognized in a number of popular science outlets. It's won the Thomas Henry Huxley Award for Outstanding Outreach Achievement from the Society for the Study of Evolution. and it's also won some game design awards. As a scientist, I was particularly chuffed to get feature articles in both Science and Nature, along with some groundbreaking research. Perhaps the place I was least expecting to get some positive feedback was in churches. And in particular, I've been working with the pastor to use the game with her youth group and to use it as an icebreaker to talk about how rigorous science does not have to be against their faith. In fact, science can align with faith and even be part of it, because science is a channel for wonder, and it's also a way to help other people. And I think this is really positive, because I think games which are playful and friendly might be one way that we can lower barriers to evolution. And religiously motivated denial of science is one of the biggest barriers we have to teaching evolution. And one of the things that I think games offer is that by giving students agency and choices, they feel more in control. And when they feel more in control, they might be more likely to entertain concepts that are difficult, or maybe even perceived as hostile to an identity that they find important. And so I just want to say in more general terms that I think this is true for any identity and any background. And what we really want to do is we want to help students of every background see themselves as represented in science, that their way of thinking is important, and that they can further our scientific knowledge. So this is really the bottom line for both me and Bailey, is that since science is true for everyone, it should be accessible and compelling to everyone too. And that's why we think stories and games are a winning combo. And not only do we have the benefits that I think games bring, is that I think the books that Bailey is writing bring additional benefits that are difficult to do in a game, including explain how we know something amazing, and how amazing is that we're all made of stardust. And I want to say that as a scientist, in that no matter how dynamic or roundabout the method of the scientific method for finding out a particular finding, we still have to write a linear method section. Next, I think Bailey's books do a wonderful job of showing how to link big concepts together. So starting with geology, going through microevolution, and showing how that connects to macroevolution. I think that's a wonderful example, and it helps students make those kinds of similar links on their own. And finally, I think Bailey herself conveys the excitement of authoring a true story, which I can say as a scientist is one of the best parts of the job. So this is what we're trying to do with Stardust Catches the Carnivores. And here are 3 ways I think we're doing this, especially with the new version. So what we're trying to communicate is that evolution is like a story generator. And this is a concept that I think Richard Dawkins' The Ancestor Tale does a brilliant job communicating, is that evolution is not like a ladder of progress. It's not a linear thing. It's like this fractal, and that you can take any organism and use it to understand that organism's perspective on this 4 billion-ish year history on Earth. So it's like a choose your own adventure. And we hope that the game board just gives that impression just by looking at it. The next thing we're doing is that we're putting an emphasis on ancestors, so that each card you can see what are the ancestors that are more closely related, all the way back to the Miacid, the initial ancestor of carnivora. What this allows players to do is start to figure out stories that they have in their hand. For example, they might have the lion and the hyena, which they recognize as the hero and the villain from The Lion King. And what they might be surprised by is that the hyena isn't a dog. In fact, they share the ancestor called the mystery cat. And now they might have questions. What is the mystery cat? And so this is where we hope that the science that we know meets the scientific method, because we've included a little booklet that explains a little bit about each ancestor. In this booklet, when you look into it, you look up mystery cat, you might find that, at least in this case, it's called mystery cat because we don't know much about it yet. This mystery cat lived in a tropical area where fossilization is difficult. It's unlikely to happen. And so while we know from other lines of evidence that mystery cat must exist, we haven't found the fossils yet. And wouldn't it be cool if you figured out how to do that? So we hope in this way that the book, the game, and the additional educational booklet creates this fun ecosystem of books and games that allows players to explore on their own terms and with their own interests in mind. And it encourages them to think of themselves as potential scientists. In fact, they already are like scientists when they're pursuing these questions and thinking about these relationships. We also hope that this might allow some flexibility in the classroom. For example, these three things might be the before, during, and after. They might form the basis for those activities, or you might think of something more creative. So with that, we'd like to thank you for your attention. There's my email there, and there's the Stardust website there, which includes the link to the Kickstarter. And yeah, with that, we look forward to your questions. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna join you back on here. And Ariel, could you stop sharing the screen? Very
Absolutely.
good. Great. That, you know, that is the name of my new password for bank statements and stuff, Mystery Cat. I'm just saying.
Awesome.
And I wanted to show you my copy.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes, this is my favorite science book. I love this book. So I totally agree the way he explains it, because like as a teacher, I can tell you the hardest thing, if you Google evolution, you're going to get that line. You know, you're going to get the chimpanzee and it's the ladder of progress or whatever. And it's so hard to teach evolution and get that idea out of the kid's head and make it realize that it looks like your board game, not like a ladder of progress. So that's awesome. We have questions. We do have questions. So number one from Kenny, is stardust the literal term of what we're made of?
Yes, right. Star stuff, stardust, yeah.
Okay, Annie asks you, so Tiktaalik is your favorite ancient creature, Bailey. What is your favorite current creature?
Well, there's different, like, well, I mean, my favorite, like, creature would be, like, a dog, but if we're talking about ancestor, I would say, like, Lucy or something.
Yes. Australopithecus afarensis. So here's another question, perhaps for you, Ariel. Do you have any suggestions for careers besides game design for people who are interested in both art and biology?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of demand for science illustration, more than ever. And I think this reflects the need for science communication more than ever. But more traditional paths could be like medical illustration, for example. But if you check out, I'm blanking on some of the blogs, but there's tons of blogs with amazing infographics that teach important scientific concepts. So if you have a passion for communicating science with art, I think that's so powerful, and you should totally run with that.
Here's a question from a teacher in Illinois, Diana. She asks, how did you two first meet or become acquainted with each other?
Do you want to answer that, Ariel?
Sure. Yeah, it was actually the magic of the Kickstarter community, which is a wonderful place to meet science communicators, because there's so many people doing awesome things with science communication there. And so, yeah, it's a small world also, because you get connected with people very quickly. And I would say that our methods of communication are very complementary. And so I'm really excited that we've been able to work together. It's been awesome.
Yeah.
Next question. If it is unlikely to find the remains of the mystery cat, how do we know that the lion and the hyena are related to it?
Great question. So yeah, so this is what's so exciting about evolution research, is that you can use so many different lines of evidence. So this includes physical evidence, and often we use characters in the skull, because the skull tends to persist in the fossil record. So And this is something that we can study in descendants as well. So all of the animals on the cat side, which includes the hyenas and meerkats and civets, which aren't true cats, but they're on the cat side, have a special way that their auditory bulla is formed, which is part of the inner ear. And of course, carnivores, cats and dogs, their hearing is very important. And so they have two different, slightly different ways that their auditory bulla are set up. And we know that they inherited this from a common ancestor. And that ancestor was probably a mystery cat.
Mystery cat.
Yeah, but you can also use genetics, and with genetics you can do amazing stuff in terms of estimating when this divergence happens. And you can also start to use biogeography, which Bailey's book introduces, to figure out where those ancestors likely were. And that's how we know it was probably in a tropical area, which is difficult.
So I think this is the last question, unless people start asking more questions while you're answering this. The Stardust series, it's for young children, right? What's the age those books are targeted for?
5 to 11, but if you're, it can go for longer than that too, if you want. Yeah.
So how do you go about putting very difficult concepts in a way that very young minds can understand them? That's a very hard question, I think, but.
Yeah, I use a lot of scientists to help me with it because it's a hard concept as a teenager as well to understand. So I love to like reach out to other people and look up ideas on how to introduce it to other kids. I love to talk about it. I love the concept of it. So I think it's sometimes even easier sometimes on different concepts to teach, but definitely evolution's the hardest one.
Yeah. Boy, you've got them enraptured with the mystery cat thing. Now they want to know if there's a scientific name for mystery cat.
Well, because we haven't found the fossil, we're not able to name it. But I mean, if there's other contenders, let me know, because I will start making a case for mystery cat.
Felis Mysteriosus.
Yes.
Okay, everybody. That was fun. We have 81 people in here. Awesome. That is a lot of people, and you guys were great in the chat. You followed along. Your questions were wonderful. I once again put the Kickstarter link in there, and I want to commit to buying several versions of the game. That we get money as teachers for our classrooms in the summertime, and once I get that money, I'm going to buy 4 or 5 copies of the game to use in the different groups in my classroom for next year. Hopefully there is a next year. This online teaching was fun at first, but it's not so much anymore. How are you dealing with it, Bailey?
The whole quarantine thing has been a little hard lately, but I've been doing a lot of sitting around mostly, but YouTube videos, watching all those things, getting outside, taking my dog on a walk, all those things, but yeah. How about you?
No, it's been rough. I see there's some students in here and they're saying we need school. I miss school. So I get it.
No, I never thought I would need school so much.
I know. And your parents are dying to get you out of the house, believe me. So anyway, everybody, thank you for joining us today. And I really, really enjoyed that. Ariel, I'd like to invite you back for maybe an evolutionary biology topic next year. You're a wonderful presenter. Bailey, as always, you're wonderful too. This is, of course, everyone, the last TIES webinar for this school year. We'll start back up again next August and September. I'll give you guys a break in the summertime, but I know I see quite a few attendees that are always here, always enjoying the webinars. So thank you for being such good fans of the teacher program and the TIES program and our webinars. I'll let you guys have the last word.
Thank you for joining. This was an amazing experience. Hopefully I can come again, but thanks.
Yeah, a complete delight. And it's been a wonderful year working with, or more, with Bailey and the Stardust team. So thank you for letting us chat to you about it.
That was
wish you all
fun.
the best this summer.
Thank you, everybody.